Вітання нашим гостям і всім, хто нас
Dear guests, dear online viewers, welcome. Now we will have a press conference on enforced disappearance. We have Tae-Ung Baik here with us, the Vice-Chairman of the working group, Mr. Mickevičius, member of the working group, and Luciano Hazan, who is also a member of the working group on enforced disappearances. Now, please, you have the floor.
My name is Tae-Ung. I'm Vice Chair of Working Group on Enforced or Involuntary Disappearances of the United Nations Human Rights Council. On my right, we have a member of Working Group, Mr. Henrikas Mickevičius from Lithuania, and also Mr. Luciano Hazan from Argentina. Our delegation consists of the three members from working group being supported by two secretariat members from UN Human Rights Council Geneva office came to the country of Ukraine to conduct a country visit, which started on June 11th. And today we would like to share our conclusive observation with you. First of all, we would like to thank the government of Ukraine for inviting us for this country visit and offering support to make this visit successful. We would like to also thank the de facto authority in Donetsk and Luhansk for cooperation during the visit in the territories under their control. We also would like to thank the UN Human Rights Monitoring Mission in Ukraine for continuous support during the visit. During our 10 days visit, we met extensively the governmental agencies in the government of Ukraine, such as the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ombudsperson of Ukraine, the National Preventive Mechanism, the Supreme Court, the Ministry of Internal Affairs, the Ministry of Justice, the State Enforcement Service Administration, and the Center for Free Legal Aid, the Security Service of Ukraine, and the Ministry of Defense, the National Police, the Office of the Prosecutor General, and military prosecutors. We also met Ombudsperson of the self-proclaimed Donetsk People's Republic and the Forensic Bureau in Donetsk. In the territory being controlled by self-proclaimed Luhansk People's Republic, we met Acting Minister of Foreign Affairs and the representative of the Luhansk People's Republic in Working Group on Humanitarian Issues of a Trilateral Contact Group on Ukraine in Minsk. We also would like to report to you that we met victims, survivors, and relatives of the disappeared persons throughout the country during our visit. Also met representative of a civil society, NGOs, and lawyers. We would like to extend our thanks to all stakeholders who we met, and those meetings were really helpful for us to form our views on our visit. The working group had received numerous accounts of disappearances occurring in particular at the beginning of the conflict and its aftermath, notably in 2014 and 2015. The stories indicate that all parties to the conflict have been responsible for such acts, with the allegations pointing many at the SBU and the voluntary battalions and the security services established by de facto authorities in Donetsk and Lugansk. We would like to stress that all parties to the conflict in Ukraine have obligation under both human rights law and international humanitarian law, prohibiting enforced disappearances under any circumstances, including situation of a conflict. There is, we observed, total impunity for acts of enforced disappearances on both sides of the contact line, mainly due to a lack of interest and political will. We would like to share some of our preliminary observation by topics. First, going through the territory controlled by the government of Ukraine, and then we talk about the territories controlled by self-proclaimed republics, Donetsk and Luhansk republics. I will briefly talk about legislation. The working group welcomes the Ukrainian government's ratification of the Convention on Enforced Disappearances in 2015, including the recognition of competence of the committee to receive individual communications. However, we note that there is a area of concern that there are no crime of enforced disappearances are currently adequately included in the criminal legislation. The legislation under the Convention and Declaration of 1992 should include the modes of criminal liability of committing crime, attempts, or accomplice and command or superior individual criminal responsibility. And enforced disappearances should be considered as a continuous crime. In that sense, we note current legislative proposal to adopt law on missing persons, but we are concerned that it is not clear whether and how the bill will address the situation of victims of enforced disappearances. We also recommend the government of Ukraine to adopt a certificate of absence system, which could permit the recognition of some of the rights and entitlements of the disappeared. We are acknowledging the forthcoming reform of the security sector, which includes the creation of a new State Bureau of Investigation, SBI. We would like to acknowledge that, and the reform of the security sector should provide for independent mechanisms of oversight to monitor the conduct of law enforcement and security officers.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Luciano Hazan. I will talk about truth and reparation with regard to enforced disappearances. This is a very important issue because the right to truth for the victims and for the whole society is one of the core elements of the law on enforced disappearances. So during our visit, we have observed that while a number of missings at the beginning of the conflicts have been released in the context of the Minsk agreements, there are many others that remain unaccounted for. We have also noted that there is currently an impasse in the process of simultaneous releases of detainees in the context of Minsk, and we have learned that from almost all parties. So all parties are, in a way, consent on this problem. So we highly recommend that families on both sides of the contact line be informed about the fate of their disappeared relatives and where they are on the list of detainees to be simultaneously released. It is also important that all existent information concerning the whereabouts of the person is shared among the parties on an humanitarian basis. And it is also a very well-established standard in international human rights law that the information, and also in humanitarian law, that the information available in the archives in state institutions should be also made available to those who are in charge of the search of the disappeared. We have also knew about an attempt of the relatives of the disappeared in both sides to meet in order to join forces to search and locate their loved ones. And we also knew that that intention was frustrated by the security service, impeding the families for crossing the contact line. So the working group noted that these initiatives should be facilitated and supported rather than discouraged and obstructed. With regards to graves, we have received information that there are unidentified graves in both sides of the contact line. And while some bodies have been exhumed, identified, and handed over to the families, there are others that have not yet been exhumed or secured. So we are recommending that exhumation and identification are conducted as soon as possible, and to do that with the help of international organizations and in the context of the international standards in this matter. We have also received information that there is no centralized system of data collection of burial sites. And we are also concerned about reported misidentification of remains. Related to reparation, another important issue as an element of the rights of the victims for disappearances, we couldn't find any case in which the relatives of the disappeared have been compensated or have been provided with any psychosocial, medical, or other assistance from the state. So proactive measures should be taken to minimize and redress the suffering of the victims. In this regard, it's of a special concern for us that the new draft law on missing persons doesn't clarify whether it's the situation of the victims will be addressed in this respect. So we encourage the authorities, especially in the legislative power, to take the opportunity and make changes in this sense.
I will say a few words about the justice system. So the rights of the victims are threefold. There is a right to truth, to know what happened, and to know about the fate and whereabouts of disappeared loved one. There is a right to reparation, including compensation, psychosocial support, and so on, as colleague already said. And there is a right to justice. In terms of right to justice, unfortunately, we have to conclude that there is almost total impunity for acts of enforced disappearance. And the reason for this are numerous, but I would like to emphasize two, from our point, main reasons for this state of affairs. One is there is an obvious lack of will to investigate certain disappearances. I will tell in a minute what I mean. And there is also inadequate legal framework for that. Specifically, Criminal Code of Ukraine does not contain the crime of enforced disappearance. cases are investigated and tried under different other definitions, like illegal deprivation of liberty, abduction, and similar. It's not the same as enforced disappearances. In terms of will, we noticed that when it comes to investigations, initiation of investigations, conducting investigations and trials of alleged crimes committed by Ukrainian, either, let's say, voluntary battalions or SBU, there is obvious hesitance to do so. And at the same time, there is obvious as well desire to work on those cases which involved armed groups on the other side of the line, meaning so-called Donetsk People's Republic and Luhansk People's Republic. From our humanitarian mandate point of view, there should be no double standards when it comes to accountability for enforced disappearances. And all acts that may constitute enforced disappearances should be investigated and prosecuted irrespective of who is the perpetrator. Also, I would like to say that we noticed attempts to improve the current institutional settings for investigating, in general, investigations, and also in particular investigating crimes of enforced disappearances. There is a bureau for State Investigation Bureau. It's already established. This bureau will take over investigations conducted currently by the military prosecution, which we welcome in general. But also we received an information that there is an attempt to save military justice, and it would include investigation, and also there is an attempt to establish a military tribunal to try certain individuals. We consider that we consider there is international standard which says that when it comes to crimes of enforced disappearances, no special military tribunals can hear such cases. This should be ordinary civil courts. Also, I would like to emphasize that we received reliable information about unofficial places of deprivation of liberty, especially at the beginning of the conflict. Some of those facilities were simply converted into detention places, and some were managed by SBU. Such places, according to information we received, were in Kramatorsk, Mariupol, Odessa, Pokrovsk, Kharkiv. Also, those allegations that such places exist, one of the elements of those allegations is that people who were held there were also ill-treated, and some of the ill-treatment may amount to torture. That's shortly about justice. I would like a few words to say about so-called Donetsk People's Republic and so-called Luhansk People's Republic. Since we received worrisome reports of serious human rights violations in those territories, we request a visit there. We were granted, and we're grateful for that. There are a number of problems. I would like to emphasize perhaps 3 of them here. One is that in both of those so-called republics, There is, in one case, a possibility for administrative arrest for up to 30 days. In another one, so-called preventive arrests for up to 60 days on the suspicion of involvement in some illegal activities. The problem with this law is that there is no effective supervision for these arrests for up to 30 and up to 60 days. This actually situation when whereabouts of these persons who are detained this way actually may be considered as an authorization to disappear individuals. A number of detainees which were detained in different facilities on the territories controlled by those de facto authorities also reported they were detained under very dire conditions, and in numerous instances they were being subjected to torture and other forms of ill treatment. What is positive, perhaps, I would like to emphasize that de facto authorities in both of those so-called republics, people republics, expressed their willingness to reinvigorate negotiations for simultaneous releases of detainees of both sides of a conflict. And just a word on Crimea. Unfortunately, we were not able to visit Crimea in the context of this country visit to Ukraine for obvious reasons. According to reliable information we have, there have been 42 cases of enforced disappearance in Crimea since March 2014. As of today, 27 individuals have been released, 2 have been detained, 1 is reported dead, and 12 are still disappeared. In 2014, most of the perpetrators allegedly belonged to the Crimean Self-Defense Forces. In the following years, most disappearances were attributed by our sources to the officers of the Russian Federal Security Service. Also, we were informed about transfers of detainees from Crimea to the territory of Russian Federation without notifying families about the fact of transfer and no informing them about the new location of the detention. We request from the Russian Federation to take measures to ensure the protection of those in Crimea from enforced disappearances and recommend that independent human rights monitoring missions to assess the situation on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you. And now it's time for questions, I suppose, or you have just some final remarks? Okay, it's time for questions. Dear colleagues, if you have questions, you're welcome to ask them.
Добрий день, Людмила Гарпинч, телеканал АТР. Хотіла запитати, от ви сказали, що звернулись до Росії, да, щодо...
You mentioned that you were talking to Russia. You mentioned. Can you hear me? You mentioned that you were requesting Russia about disappeared persons in Crimea. Have they responded with an explanation? What is happening? Why they do this? What is their situation with human rights? Why people are missing? Why families are not informed? Did you receive any explanation from Russia? Thank you.
Thank you for a good question. With regard to Crimea, it's very peculiar situation, as you know. It's under the resolution of the General Assembly of the United Nations. It's a territory of the Ukraine. However, it's under de facto control of Russian Federation. So we cannot visit Crimea and collect information on the ground. We cannot even speak to the authorities, either de facto authorities of Crimea or authorities of Russian Federation. We cannot also meet freely non-governmental organizations acting there and also relatives of disappeared individuals. So we collect information through different other sources, and we make conclusion on the basis of this available information. On the basis of this information, I already gave you numbers, what we know about the disappeared individuals on the territory of Crimea. And also we sent to the Russian Federation a document which we call General Allegation, in which we pose a number of questions to the government of the Russian Federation and ask them to provide information. As of today, we cannot report any satisfactory reply from the government of the Russian Federation.
The next question, please. One question will be from me. You have mentioned very clear figures about situation with forced disappearances in Crimea. Perhaps you have general figures about the total number of people who became victims of forced disappearances during the 4 years of this undeclared war, including victims of forced disappearances on the territories not controlled by the government and the territories controlled by the government.
Just about the numbers.
Unfortunately, there are no very clear numbers on it. There are some numbers on missing persons that are not exactly in forced disappearances that may be included on that numbers. This is something that should be done to build numbers, to have better information, because information on the numbers of victims is essential to develop the policies to prevent, to investigate and to punish for disappearances. So there are no very clear information.
I just would like to add to what colleagues said, that this is one of the issues we will probably formulate a recommendation to the government of Ukraine to deal with. There is no reliable statistics, no reliable numbers. And it should again start from the defining what enforced disappearance is. And when we speak to different authorities, they were giving us different numbers, which are quite contradictory sometimes in terms of difference between them. And that's because there is no central agency, one agency which would be responsible for collection of this data and based on one methodology and one concept. That's one of the issues here. In terms of method, we are recommending the government to begin with the registration of all of the arrested or people who are deprived of liberty, and maintaining national registry is, in our view, very important, and there should be more proactive efforts to document all of the disappeared persons in the territory of Ukraine government or in other territories being controlled by so-called Donetsk and Luhansk People's Republics.
Thank you. Are there more questions? If there is no more questions, thank you. Let's finish.